One morning, the old water rat put his head out of his hole. He had bright, beady eyes and stiff gray whiskers, and his tail was like a long bit of black India rubber. Some little ducks were swimming about in the pond, looking rather like a number of yellow canaries, and their mother, who was pure white with real red legs, was trying to teach them how to stand on their heads in the water. You will never be in the best society unless you can stand on your heads, she kept saying to them. The little ducks paid no attention whatsoever. They were so young that they did not know what an advantage it is to be in society at all. What disobedient children, cried the old water rat. They really deserve to be drowned. Nothing of the kind, answered the linnet, who was sitting in a willow tree nearby. Everyone must make a beginning, and parents cannot be too patient. Ah, I know nothing about the feelings of parents, said the water rat. I am not a family man. In fact, I have never been married, and I never intend to be. Love is all very well in its way, but friendship is a far higher thing. Indeed, I know of nothing in the world that is either nobler or rarer than a devoted friendship. And what is your idea of the duties of a devoted friend? Asked the linnet. I should expect my devoted friend to be devoted to me, of course, said the water rat. I will tell you a story about that, said the linnet. Once upon a time there was an honest little fellow named Hans. He had a kind face and a rather comical round figure. He lived alone in a little garden, which had 400 primroses in it. There were all kinds of good things growing there. Sweet williams and gillyflowers, marjoram and wild basil, and many other fragrant herbs. Little Hans had a great many friends, but the most devoted friend of all was big Hugh the miller. Indeed, so devoted was the rich miller to little Hans that he would never go by his garden without leaning over the wall and plucking a large nosegay of flowers, or a handful of sweet herbs, or filling his pockets with plums and cherries if it was the fruit season. Real friends should have everything in common, the miller used to say, and little Hans nodded and smiled, and felt very proud of having a friend with such noble ideas. Sometimes, indeed, the neighbors thought it strange that the rich miller never gave little Hans anything in return. But Hans never thought about these things, and nothing gave him greater pleasure than to listen to all the wonderful things the miller used to say about the unselfishness of true friendship. Every winter, little Hans had great difficulty making ends meet. The miller, however, never troubled himself about this, for he always felt that he would give Hans his wheelbarrow whenever he happened not to want it himself. There is no good in my going to see little Hans as long as the snow lasts, the miller would say to his wife, for when people are in trouble they should be left alone and not be bothered by visitors. When Hans is in trouble, I shall certainly give him my wheelbarrow. It is a most lucky thing for him that he has me for a friend. You are certainly very thoughtful about others, answered the wife, as she sat in her comfortable armchair by the big pinewood fire. It is a beautiful thing to hear you talk. But could we not ask little Hans up here? Said the miller's youngest child. If poor Hans is in trouble, I will give him half my porridge and show him my white rabbits. What a silly boy you are, cried the miller. If Hans came here and saw our warm fire and our good supper and our great cask of wine, he might get envious and envy is a most terrible thing. I shall certainly not allow Hans to come here." So little Hans worked away in his garden. When spring came, the miller arrived. "Little Hans," said the miller, "I want you to mend my barn roof." Poor little Hans climbed up and worked all day long till sunset, and at sunset the miller came to see how he was getting on. "Have you mended the hole in the roof yet, little Hans?" cried the miller in a cheery voice. "It is quite mended," said little Hans, coming down the ladder. "Ah," said the miller, "there is no work so delightful as the work one does for others. It is certainly a great privilege to hear you talk," answered little Hans, sitting down and wiping his forehead. "A very great privilege. But I am afraid I shall never have such noble ideas as you have." "Oh, they will come to you," said the miller, "but you must take more pains. At present, you have only the practice of friendship. Some day, you will have the theory also." Day after day, Hans was sent on errands, or set to work in the miller's fields, and never paid for any of it, while the wheelbarrow was always spoken of as coming soon. One day, little Hans came to the miller to borrow his wheelbarrow, for he had a large load of faggots to bring to market. "I am afraid I cannot let you have it," said the miller. "The fact is, I want to use it myself just now." "Well, really," said Hans, "that is very unkind of you. But you are always thinking of yourself," said the miller. "I lent you my plank and my bucket and my large saw, and now you refuse me my own wheelbarrow." "When did you lend me these things?" said little Hans. "You have never lent me anything at all. I repaired your roof and dug your garden and brought your wood to market." "That may be," said the miller, "but I intended to lend you my wheelbarrow, and that is the same thing. Pray do not talk about gratitude to me. I hate gratitude. A man who is grateful has no real depth of feeling. I am your devoted friend, and it is only right that you should give me all the help I need." Poor little Hans was very much distressed, and could not think what to do. The miller was always speaking about what he intended to give, and somehow Hans never found the courage to question him. One evening there was a loud knock at little Hans's door. He unbarred it, and there stood the miller with a lantern in one hand and a big stick in the other. "Dear little Hans," cried the miller, "I am in great trouble. My little boy has fallen off a ladder and hurt himself, and I am going for the doctor. But the doctor lives so far away, and the night is so stormy, that it has just occurred to me that it would be far better if you went instead of me. You know I am going to give you my wheelbarrow, and so it is only fair that you should do something for me in return." Poor little Hans hardly dared to refuse, for the miller was indeed a devoted friend. He took his great fur coat, his warm scarlet cap, and his lantern, and set out into the storm. What a dreadful storm it was! The night was so black that little Hans could see nothing, and the wind was so strong that he could hardly stand. However, he was very courageous, and after he had been walking about 3 hours, he arrived at the doctor's house and knocked on the door. But little Hans never reached home again. He lost his way on the moor, fell into a bog, and was drowned. Next day, the body of little Hans was found by some goat herds floating in the pool, and they brought it back to the cottage. Everybody went to little Hans's funeral, for he was so popular, and the miller was the chief mourner. I have certainly lost a great deal, said the miller, as he and his neighbors were standing by the grave, "for I intended to give him my wheelbarrow, and now I really don't know what to do with it. It is very much in my way at home, and it is in such bad repair that I could not get anything for it if I sold it. I will certainly take care not to give away anything again. One certainly suffers for being generous." "Well," said the water rat, after a long pause. "Well, that is the end," said the linnet. "But what became of the miller?" asked the water rat. "Oh, I really do not know," replied the linnet, "and I am sure that I do not care." "It is quite evident that you have no sympathy at all," said the water rat. "I hope you are not so hard-hearted as that story would suggest." And the water rat turned round, dived into the water, and disappeared. "What a very silly story," he said to himself as he swam away.